she breaks the man. I cannot take a piece of clay and mold it into man, but I have a Father, I have a Father who can. Now he sits high in your throne, and he guides my feet wherever I go. And I don't understand, I have a Father, I have a Father who can. So much that I would die. I cannot even name the stars or count the grains of sand. Oh, but I have a Father, a heavenly Father who can. Now he sits high and it's good, and he guides my wherever I go, and I don't understand, I have a Father, I have a Father who can. Now he sits high, and it's good, and he guides my feet wherever I go, and I don't understand. I have a Father, I have a Father, I have a Father,
Good afternoon. Welcome to Empty Cross Ministries Daily Devotionals. This morning, or this afternoon, we're right just afternoon here at 12:26 p.m. We're going to take a look at Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 through 24. Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, you will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain lay by his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methuselah, and Methuselah was the father of Lamech. Lamech married two women, one named Ada and the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who played the harp and flute. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister, Naamah, Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Creation, the origins of man and woman, a fall into sin. In 3 chapters, Genesis has set the stage for human history, and now that history begins to play itself out. The first childbirth. Imagine the shock. The first formal worship, the first division of labor, the first extended families and cities and signs of culture all appear in chapter 4. But one first overshadows all the others. The first death of a human being, a death by murder. It takes just 1 generation for sin to enter the world, and by the 2nd generation, people are already killing each other. The malignant results of the fall spread that quickly. Cain offers a sacrifice to God with a poor attitude, and then kills his brother when he learns God is more pleased with Abel's offering. God steps in once again with the custom-designed punishment. Cain is to bear a mark of shame the rest of his life. The slide continues. Though for a few generations later, a man named Lamech will brag about his murders. Not all the news is bad. Civilization progresses rather quickly, with some people learning agriculture, some choosing to work with tools of bronze and iron, and some discovering music and the arts. In this way, human beings began to fulfill the role assigned to them as masters over the created world. But despite these advances, history is sliding along another track as well. Every person who follows Adam and Eve faces the same choice of whether or not to obey God's word. And with numbing monotony, all make a choice like their original parents. The next few chapters tell of an ever-worsening spiral of rebellion and evil. Look at Cain's response when God confronts him. What do you think you would say if God appeared in person to confront you about your sin?
Be thou my vision, O Lord, my heart, not be honest to me, say that thou art, thou my best thought, by day or waking or sleeping, thy presence still be my vision.
Good morning, good afternoon again. We're back with Empty Cross Ministries Sunday School class, and this is brought to you by Empty Cross Ministries. For the Sunday School, we're going to be looking at 2 Chronicles chapter 17, verses 1 through 6, and we're going to jump down to verses 10 through 19 of that same chapter. And this just, jump right into it. And Jehoshaphat, his son, reigned in his stead, and strengthened himself against Israel. And he placed forces in all the fortified cities of Judah, and set garrisons in the land of Judah, and in the cities of Ephraim, which Asa his father had taken. And Jehovah was with Jehoshaphat, because he walked in the first ways of his father David, and sought not unto the Baalim, but sought to the God of his father, and walked in his commandments, and not after the doings of Israel. Therefore Jehovah established the kingdom in his hand, and all Judah brought Jehoshaphat tribute, and he had riches and honor in abundance, and his heart was lifted up in the ways of Jehovah. And furthermore, he took away the high places and the Asherim out of Judah. That was verses 1 through 6. Now we're going to jump down to verses 10 through 19. And the fear of Jehovah fell upon all the kingdoms of the lands that were round about Judah, so that they made no war against Jehoshaphat. And some of the Philistines brought Jehoshaphat presents and silver for tribute. The Arabians also brought him flocks, 7,700 rams, and 7,700 he-goats. And Jehoshaphat waxed great exceedingly, and he built in Judah castles and cities of store. And he had many works in the cities of Judah, and men of war, mighty men of valor in Jerusalem. And this was the numbering of them according to their fathers' houses. Of Judah, the captains of thousands, Ada the captain, and with him mighty men of valor, 300,000. And next to him Jehohanan the captain, and with him 280,000. And next to him Amasah the son of Zechariah, who willingly offered himself unto Jehovah, and with him 200,000 mighty men of valor. And of Benjamin Elidah, a mighty man of valor, and with him 200,000 armed with bow and shield. And next to him Jehozabad, and with him 180,000 ready prepared for war. These were they that waited on the king, besides those whom the king put in the fortified cities throughout Judah. This is happening between 914 and 889 BC. The places here are Jerusalem and the land of Judah, and the people involved here are Jehoshaphat, his people, and some of the neighboring kingdoms. Jehoshaphat was the fourth king of Judah, and like his father Asa, he was a good king. Jehoshaphat was contemporary with Ahab, king of Israel, and his two sons, Ahaziah and Jehoram, both of whom reigned in the northern kingdom. Ahaziah died as the result of an accident after 2 years on the throne, and was succeeded by his brother Jehoram, who was later killed by Jehu. Jehoshaphat also had a son whose name was Jehoram, who married the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And it was this son who succeeded his father as king of Judah. Jehoram's only living son, Ahaziah, was the next king of Judah. And at his death, his mother, Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, destroyed all the seed royal except little Joash, who later became king, and usurped the throne for 6 years. All of this is referred to in order to show some of the bitter fruits which came from Jehoshaphat's affinity with wicked Ahab. Jehoshaphat, on the whole, was one of the best kings of Judah, in spite of some grave mistakes which he made, and it can be said to his credit that when he saw his mistakes he usually turned immediately to God and sought his pardon. Jehoshaphat raised the kingdom to the highest level which it had reached since the disruption. But in spite of all this, Jehoshaphat's unfortunate alliance with Ahab did much to neutralize some of his virtues, and as we have already seen, brought ruin to his successors. Someone has said that Jehoshaphat's good talents, the benevolence of his disposition, and his generally sound judgment are portrayed not only in the great domestic policies which distinguished his reign, but also by the manner in which they were executed. No trace of that pride can be found in him, which dishonored some and ruined others of the kings who preceded and followed him. The reforms which Jehoshaphat instituted resulted in destroying much of the Asherah worship, in spite of the fact that many of the high places were allowed to remain. And he walked in all the way of Asa his father. He turned not aside from it, doing that which was right in the eyes of Jehovah. Howbeit the high places were not taken down, the people still sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places. The chronicler explained that the people had not set their hearts unto God of their fathers. It is also said that Jehoshaphat made peace with the kings of Israel. Jehoshaphat built up a tremendous army under competent officers, and none of the nations about him made war on him. This good king was vitally interested in the worship of his people, which he demonstrated in the early part of his reign, as we shall refer to later, by a nationwide teaching program. Jehoshaphat, in short, was one of the most zealous of the royal reformers, and employed all the power and authority of his office to protect, defend, and make practically effective the laws of Jehovah. The golden text here would be, "And Jehoshaphat brought them back unto Jehovah, the God of their fathers." Regardless of what one's position may be in the economy of God, he has a tremendous responsibility with reference to the spiritual well-being of his fellow citizens, and the greater the sphere of his influence, the greater will be his responsibility. Jehoshaphat was the king, and there was, of course, no one in the realm who was in position to exercise greater influence than he. The people of the Lord had departed from him, and it was the duty of the king, along with other good people, to do what could be accomplished in bringing them back to the God of their fathers. This, of course, is the responsibility of good people in any age of the world. Paul exhorts, "Brethren, even if a man be overtaken in any trespass, ye who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, looking to thyself, lest thou also be tempted." That's Galatians 6:1. It is not God's will that a single soul be lost eternally. This is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who would have all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. That's 1 Timothy 2, verses 3 and 4. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is longsuffering to you-ward, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. At 2 Peter 3, 9. The scriptures just cited present the divine side of the picture, and we do not get the full story until we realize that the work of winning others to Christ has been placed in the hands of the Lord's people. So far as the record goes, deity has not personally led a soul to salvation since the gospel message was placed in the hands of men. Something of that which is involved in the ministry of reconciliation, which the Lord has committed to his people, may be seen by reading James chapter 5, verses 19 and 20. Namely, "My brethren, and if any among you err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he who converteth a sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death, and shall cover a multitude of sins." It should not seem strange to anyone that James closes his letter with an appeal to the Christian people to the endeavor to win souls for the Lord. If he was the half-brother of Jesus, as many Bible students think, he was but following his famous brother and Lord's own example, for it appears to have been the Lord's last day on earth when he said to his disciples, "Go ye into all the world, and preach the gospel to the whole creation. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, and he that disbelieveth shall be condemned." Just take a look again at chapter 17, verses 1 through 6. And Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his stead, and strengthened himself against Israel. And he placed forces in all the fortified cities of Judah, and set garrisons in the land of Judah, and in the cities of Ephraim, which Asa his father had taken. And Jehovah was with Jehoshaphat, because he walked in the first ways of his father David, and sought not unto the Baalim, but sought to the God of his father, and walked in his commandments, and not after the doings of Israel. Therefore Jehovah established the kingdom in his hand, and all Judah brought to Jehoshaphat tribute, and he had riches and honor and abundance, and his heart was lifted up in the ways of Jehovah. And furthermore he took away the high places and the Asherim out of Judah. It was approximately 60 years after the division of the kingdom when Jehoshaphat came to the throne, and war between the northern and southern kingdoms had been going on practically all that time. But a few years before the death of Asa, the kingdom of Israel was divided by warring factions, which greatly weakened it and made it possible for the smaller kingdom of Judah to have the advantage. It was against this background that the statement that Jehoshaphat strengthened himself against Israel was made. The strong position which Jehoshaphat was able to assume was accomplished by placing units of his army in the principal cities of Judah and in all the cities of Ephraim, which his father had taken from the northern kingdom, as well as setting up military installations wherever they were needed in the open country. This was especially true along the border between the two rival kingdoms. The first ways of David evidently refer to the earlier part of his life before the dark clouds of sin, such as those in connection with his wicked relationship with Bathsheba, hovered over him. But David's life, on the whole, was acceptable to Jehovah, because when he did fall into sin, he turned to Jehovah for pardon. There is no record that David ever went after the Baalim. That's the plural for Baal, and that was also true of Jehoshaphat, as the text now under consideration plainly affirms. Or to state the same thing in another way, Jehoshaphat imitated the best in David's life, and also kept himself free from all forms of idol worship, such as characterized the people of the northern kingdom. But that was not all that Jehoshaphat did. He sought after the God of his father and walked in his commandments, which is another way of saying that in following the ways of David, he followed him to the extent that the latter followed Jehovah. It is always a great blessing to anyone when he has the godly example of his forebears and other righteous people. It is indeed a rare privilege for one to be born in the line of a faithful Christian parentage. There is, in such a relationship, much more than godly examples and wise and faithful instruction. There is, in addition to the things just mentioned, as someone has pointed out, tendencies in character development which spring from the line of natural descent. It is a wonderful blessing, therefore, to have had the fountain of our moral being purified and vitalized by this gracious law of God's moral and spiritual government. It appears to have been customary among the people of Israel to offer gifts to kings at the beginning of his reign, and these presents were probably intended for the royal splendor of the king himself, as well as for the maintenance of his government. The King James Version of the passage now under consideration has presents instead of tribute. But regardless of the nature of that which the people of Judah brought to their king, the text makes it plain that he had riches and honor and abundance. This also showed that Jehoshaphat had the confidence and support of his entire realm, and it was because of this righteous attitude which Jehoshaphat manifested that Jehovah established the kingdom in his hands. One frequently reads of someone's heart being lifted up with pride or in support of some false religion, but it is genuinely refreshing to read of a man's heart being lifted up in the ways of Jehovah. The practical meaning of the expression just quoted is that Jehoshaphat brought his heart into the work which had been given him to do as a result of his faith and piety, and the increase of his zeal as he sought to do that which was pleasing to the Lord. It also should be noted that the more he sought to follow in the ways of Jehovah, the more he demonstrated his opposition to those things which were displeasing to his heavenly Father. The piety and holy energy which Jehoshaphat displayed made him more like David than any other of the kings of Judah, with the possible exception of Hezekiah. 2 Chronicles 17 here, verses 10 through 12. And the fear of Jehovah fell upon all the kingdoms of the lands that were round about Judah, so that they made no war against Jehoshaphat. And some of the Philistines brought Jehoshaphat presents and silver for tribute. The Arabians also brought him flocks, 7,700 rams, and 7,700 he-goats. And Jehoshaphat waxed great exceedingly, and he built in Judah castles and cities of store. Solomon says, when a man's ways please Jehovah, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. That's Proverbs 16:7. This does not necessarily imply that such a man's enemies would approve his righteous ways, but rather that through the providence of the Lord, the enemies of the good man would be subdued. Isaiah speaks in a similar strain when he says, and all thy children shall be taught of Jehovah, and great shall be the peace of thy children. In righteousness shalt thou be established. Thou shalt be far from oppression, for thou shalt not fear, and from terror, for it shall not come near thee. Behold, they may gather together, but not by me. Whosoever shall gather together against thee shall fall because of thee. Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the fire of coals, and bringeth forth a weapon of his work. And I have created the waster to destroy. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of Jehovah, and their righteousness which is of me, saith Jehovah. While verses 7 through 9 of the chapter form which the lesson text for today is taken are not part of this study, those verses should be carefully read, for they set forth one of the major reasons for the great success of Jehoshaphat, namely his great religious teaching program. The record says that he sent some of his princes, and with them some priests and Levites, to teach in the cities of Judah. And they taught in Judah, having the book of the law of Jehovah with them. And they went out throughout all the cities of Judah, and taught among the people. The good king of Judah could never have had the enthusiastic support of his people in the cause of the Lord if they had not been taught the word of the Lord. There are many churches today among the Lord's people which are in a virtual state of rebellion against their elders simply because they have not been carefully and sufficiently taught the word of truth. If elders, wherever they are, would follow the principle which actuated Jehoshaphat, and many, of course, do just that, there would be much more harmony and cooperation on the part of the membership of the congregation, and a greater willingness and determination to follow the lead of the elders. Isaac Arrett, in commenting on the great program of Jehoshaphat, says, Jehoshaphat was wise in this. He saw that the work of reformation under his father did not reach to the roots of the evil that cursed the nation. It was merely or mainly an external change, while the sources of iniquity still remained untouched. Asa had sought to dry up the streams, but left the fountain still flowing. Jehoshaphat therefore determined on an advanced movement. He saw that the people were profoundly ignorant of the law of Jehovah, and were consequently an easy prey to superstition. They were ignorant of the glorious history of their own nation, and consequently were destitute of the enlightened patriotism without which there would be no enthusiastic devotion to their own laws and institutions. He accordingly arranged a system of general instruction of national education. Under the direction of 5 of the princes of the land, he sent forth priests and Levites to teach in the cities of Judah. Here are the germs of a system of national education, a system far in advance of our boasted system of public schools, for in our pride and self-sufficiency, we are banishing the Bible from our public schools and tabooing in a large degree all moral and religious instruction, relying on merely intellectual culture to produce and foster the intelligence and virtue which are the 2 great pillars of the temple of liberty, although it is rapidly becoming evident that we are thus learning vainly on a broken reed. But Jehoshaphat saw that moral and religious culture was essential to a true patriotism, and therefore was careful to have the people taught in the book of the law of Jehovah. We are not forgetful of the fact that the government of Judah was a theocracy. and that Jehoshaphat could therefore properly insist on a popular education in the law of the Lord, which, in our republic, in theory divorced from religion and made up of all sorts of people, where the irreligious and atheistic and Jewish and pagan elements are potent, is impractical. We see and acknowledge the difference, yet we record our conviction in the face of this tremendous difficulty that by some means, if not by the action of the state, then by the missionary zeal and voluntary efforts of the church, our population must be morally and religiously educated, or our glorious republic will perish. Its interests cannot be conserved by the godless culture of our public schools. If we are going to talk about Jehoshaphat's good reign, then we must consider those contributing factors which made it such. And if we are going to profit by the study of that which took place in Jehoshaphat's day, then we must seek to apply the same principles to our time and situation. The Church of the Lord is the greatest organism in the world today, and if we expect the Lord to pronounce His blessings upon us, that is, call us good, then we, and especially those who are in positions of influence and leadership, must see to it that God's people are taught and are encouraged to put into practice the fundamental truths of the New Testament. The program which Jehoshaphat inaugurated had a profound effect upon the nations around him, and in the same manner, the Lord's people today must be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Instead of the nations surrounding Judah making war upon those people, the record says that some of them brought presents and tributes to Jehoshaphat. These were powerful testimonials to the superiority and invincibility of an enlightened and righteous people. And we come now to verses 13 through 19. And he had many works in the cities of Judah, and men of war, mighty men of valor in Jerusalem, and this was the numbering of them according to their fathers' houses. Of Judah the captains of thousands, Adonai the captain, and with him mighty men of valor 300,000, and next to him Jehohanan the captain, and with him 280,000, and next to him Amasiah the son of Zichri, who willingly offered himself unto Jehovah, and with him 200,000 mighty men of valor, and Benjamin, Eliada, a mighty man of valor, and with him 200,000 armed with bow and shield. And next to him Jehozabad, and with him 140,000 ready prepared for war. These were they that waited on the king, besides those whom the king put in the fortified cities throughout all Judah. In speaking of the peace and prosperity of the righteous, we should keep in mind the fact that during the Old Testament period, the people of God, and particularly after they were organized into a kingdom, like the nations about them, used armed forces, not only for their protection, but also for the punishment of evildoers. Those kingdoms were theocratic in their nature, which means they were under the immediate direction of God. The religious aspect of their government was administered by prophets and priests ordained by God, while their civil relationships were regulated by the chief of state and his ministers. Both, let it be remembered, were united under the overseership of God Himself. But when we come to the kingdom of Christ, no such conditions exist. There is, instead, a separation of church and state. Jesus said to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence." Peter exhorts the Lord's people of this age, "Beloved, I beseech you as sojourners and pilgrims, to abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul, having your behavior seemly among the Gentiles, that wherein they speak against you as evildoers, that they may be by your good works which they behold glorify God in the day of visitation." The attitude of the Lord's people towards civil government is set forth in such passages as Romans 13, 1-7, and 1 Peter 2, 13-17. All civil governments of man are ordained of God, but they are not because of what they are in covenant relationship with him. And with this in mind, there does not appear to be anything inconsistent with either their nature or purpose in maintaining standing armies for their own protection, as well as for use in the providence of God in punishing wicked nations. But even righteous people today are often respected by the unrighteous. But if they are not, and are called on to suffer persecution because of their devotion to the Lord, they are still blessed of God. It frequently requires suffering and hardships on the part of the Lord's people in order to reach some who will not otherwise listen to the gospel message. But we may be sure that God will never forget to bless those who suffer in this way. Although the kingdom of Judah was relatively small, Jehoshaphat had a tremendous army of well over 1 million men, as may be seen from this section of the lesson text. But even with that kind of an armed force, he did not forget to put his trust in the Lord. And Jehoshaphat stood in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem in the house of Jehovah before the new court, and he said, O Jehovah, the God of our fathers, art not thou God in heaven, and art not thou ruler over all kingdoms of the nations, and in thy hand, in power and might, so that none is able to withstand thee. O our God, wilt thou not judge them? For we have no might against this great company that cometh against us. Neither know we what to do, but our eyes are upon thee. It should be noted, however, that the enemies did not come against It should be noted, however, that the enemies did come against Jehoshaphat after his unholy alliance with the house of Ahab.
Oh